So, selling versus teaching. We're going to jump right into the thing you need to understand about investors is it's not touchy-feely. That's not the kind of touchy-feely it is, but it is more of a teaching versus a selling. When you're selling, it's more transactional. When you're teaching, it's more long-term relationship. If any of you had any kids in school, if you were a teacher, your kid was having trouble with understanding a concept, you wouldn't kick the kid out of school, or you shouldn't kick the kid out of school. You should figure out how you as a teacher can get better at making sure you explain concepts simply. Okay? So in this case here, if your client's not doing what you want them to be doing after you've presented them a good investment opportunity, it means that you haven't trained them well enough. You haven't taught them well enough what a good opportunity is. Does that make sense? They're not understanding it. Don't use industry jargon. We're going to jump into a bunch of it without explaining it. And then focus on the need of them, not on your salesperson's need. So we all have these business models. When you get into the investment side, you need to make sure that what you're selling them it's almost more of a financial advisor relationship than it is just a transaction. So we won't spend a lot of time on that. I think you've got it. Need of the client. Okay. How do you know what the need is of the client? The way you know the need of the client, you should already be doing this in many cases but now you're just changing. It's not just about their needs for the house because they don't have to live in this property. It's their need for income. It's their need for finances. Where are they currently financial? If you're going to help somebody get somewhere to a destination, you have to understand a couple of things about that destination. One, when do they have to be there? Where are they trying to go? And you better start with where are they now? Okay? So here's your questions. What are your goals? What are the goals? What's your time frame? What kind of investing are you interested in? What have you done in the past? How did that work for you? Right? What kind of returns are you getting on your other investments? Get outside of real estate with this question, because you'll find out that they got $500,000 sitting over here getting 4% interest in the stock market, whereas you could walk them through getting it into a separate a 401k or a self-directed IRA and run it that way. Okay? What kind of returns do you get? What resources do you currently have? What do you need to do to access these resources? There's a lot of different time frames involved with like using 401ks, making transfers, and things like that. You want to get that lined up. What would obtaining your goal mean to you? This is a big question. What are you going to get out of attaining your goal? What is your goal? Is it to provide for your kids? Is it to provide for your retirement? What is your goal? What does that look like for you? And then what are you willing to sacrifice today for tomorrow? Okay? This is still kind of touchy-feely, but it's very important for you to get into these questions because later on, as you're trying... Are you okay on...
Yeah.
Can you see? Okay. Later on, as you're trying to guide them, you're not going to be able to guide them if you don't have this background. Okay? Now let's talk about people as you start moving into working with investors. Everyone could be an investor, right? But no one has to be an investor. You understand that? When they're buying for themselves, they're going to live in the house. Pretty good chance that they're going out at this time of year looking at open houses, they probably want to buy a house. If they're an investor, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to buy a house. They don't have to buy real estate. They can invest in 10 other ways of investing. They can invest in products that you don't have. So there's a lot of options open to investors that aren't driven by their personal need to have shelter. Does that make sense? So when they start talking as an investor, they say, oh yeah, I want to invest in houses. We're going to go over some of these phrases. If they say I have access to unlimited funds, that should be a red flag. Okay? These people will waste your time. By the way, Brent tells people not to do investment property. Brent does not do any investment property and has never, since day one, unlike listings, which he used to not do but then started doing, he doesn't do investment property. Most of them he refers to me. But any of you can do investments if you want to, but you need to understand these red flags. What I'm pretty good at, and those of you who know me, is I'm pretty good at cutting through the crap. Okay? So I don't waste a lot of time. Investors will waste a ton of your time. Listen for these red flags. Come talk to me if you get some of these red flags. I've been looking for more than 3 months and there's no good deals. There's always good deals, right? I actually teach my clients that every home they look at is a good deal at some price. The question is just what price, right? My partner and I, if they say my partner and I, you need to be figuring out who that partner is. and what your relationship to him is, and who has the controlling interest, which partner is driving the car versus which one's along for the ride, right? You don't date strangers. You got to get to know them a little bit, okay? I have several agents looking for me. That's not fun in any conversation, whether it's single family, whether it's owner-occupied or investor. If you ever hear the words come up, can you write that offer and are signed? They'll ask you, this one you might get a little late in your relationship, they'll ask you and to write into the contract that Bob Smith is buying this property and are assigned. Okay? Does everybody know what that means?
Does that mean he's going to broker the deal to someone else?
It means that he's asking to be able to broker it to someone else. So some people say, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to have that option to do it. If you ever get that on a listing contract, you should not accept it. It's negligent in your duty, I believe.
Can you go into more what that means?
Yeah. So what it means is they write it and are assigned. What that means is you don't know who the buyer is anymore. Because they can take that contract and sell the contract to another buyer. They'll call it wholesaling, right? Nothing wrong with wholesaling in certain situations, but definitely something wrong with wholesaling if you're representing a listing and you don't know that you're wholesaling, right? You accepted an offer. They didn't tell you they were going to shop it, and they're really telling you by that little phrase right there. So if you ever see that, it means that they have the legal right to sell that contract to someone else, which basically means that whatever pre-qualifying you did is out the window because you don't even know who the next person is. And you can't get out of the contract, okay? The term wholesaling used in any capacity. And so what it usually means is I just spent all my money going to a real estate seminar. Okay? But there are good wholesalers out there. We're not going to go into it, but there's two ways to wholesale. One, wholesaling is good for people that have absolutely no money. And they can't do anything but wholesale. What they're basically doing is bird dogging. They're going out and finding a deal and trying to bring it to another investor. That's good for people that have no money that want to learn how to invest. Not good for a real estate agent because you're not going to put that deal together. The second way is people that have too much money. They have so many deals going that they can't handle all of their transactions. I've got a friend of mine that was actually at my event yesterday that actually became a wholesaler. That's all she does. But it's because she's a general contractor. She flipped 100 houses. She knows exactly what she's doing, and she would rather flip the contract than flip the house. Okay? Those two extremes are where wholesaling's good. Any other way of wholesaling is usually bad for you as an agent. All right. We're going to jump right into terminology. I apologize if some of this is redundant, but I also don't want to skip over it because it's crucial to other stuff later. Okay? So, everybody knows what appreciation is? Got it? We're all in real estate. We know what appreciation is. You might not know how much it's appreciated, though. This is the real numbers. National appreciation from 1968 to 2004 was 6.8%. Those are real numbers. But notice a big shift. National numbers. 2004 to 2014, it was only on average 3%. So you'll hear agents say appreciation was 6%. You'll hear them say 9%. So those are the real numbers. California, from 334,000 to 552,000, 6.5% in the last 10 years. Okay? But when you get into Sacramento, in the last 8 years, it was 15% a year. Guys, understand that's a huge freaking number. Because if you understand later, I'm going to show you that appreciation is basically a leveraged component, and it actually goes up 4 times. Your return on investment is 4 times what your appreciation is. There's a lot of people that have made a 60% return on their money, no problem. Okay? We'll get into that in a little bit. But the other thing about this last 8 years, most of that growth, about 85% of that growth happened in the 6 years preceding the last 2 years. So the last 8 years, the last 2 years, it's been very small growth, only 4 or 5%. The years before that were really incredible. Okay? Everybody understand that? All right, that's good. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Here we are, real estate terminology 101, equity. Yes?
Why do you think the whole last 2 years have been significantly less than the previous 6?
Because we're peaking out and we're getting ready to do a downturn. So we're at a peak on the model, in my opinion. Equity, amount of value in a property after loans or other liens are accounted for. Revenue, total amount of income from rent or other sources. Revenue is, I rented my property for $2,000, I've got $24,000 in revenue, right? Operating expenses, utilities, property taxes, insurance, management fees, ongoing maintenance. This does not include debt service, right? So I rented it for $2,000. Whether I have a loan on it or not, my operating expenses would be my taxes, my insurance, my management fee, but it's irregardless of whether there's a loan on it. So your mortgage, your principal is not included. Your principal and interest is not included in that operating expense yet. Okay? All right, so we're going to move on to the next. So when I go back to that operating expense, the principal and interest is considered debt service. So you'll see that show up on debt service. Okay, here's my NOI, net operating income, projected real estate revenue. There's my vacancy factor. Everybody know what a vacancy factor is? So it basically assumes that you're going to have your investment property someday somebody's going to move out of it. Okay? Think about this for a second. Put it in perspective. If I have one rental and it goes empty for 1 month, what is my vacancy factor for that year? You divide 1 into 12 and you come up with what? 8.5? So the lowest your vacancy factor should ever be for a rental is 8.5%. If it's a duplex, it could technically be as low as 4.5%. But that's a number that often gets overlooked. Okay? I usually use 5% because most of the time you've got a rental, it's going to run up real fast. But understand it's a little bit off if you're only using 5%. The more appropriate response would be higher. Additional income, if you've got anything like a laundromat, anything like that that's producing additional income, then you'd add that in there. That gets you your gross operating income, and there's your net operating income on the property. Okay?
That's without a loan, right?
That's without a loan. Okay? So, here we go into capitalization rate. This is where you'll understand why you've done all this without a loan. The NOI divided by your sales price, irregardless of how you financed it. Okay? So what this number is good for, it's good for comparing two different investment opportunities, which one has the best return, which one's going to generate the best cap rate. The other part of the equation, when you bring financing into it, any property will cash flow as long as you put 60 to 70% down, right? So that's why you want to have a tool that separates those two. All right, so your rent of $2,500. I have a house that they buy. It's a your purchase is going to be a $400,000 house, and its rents out for $2,500. 2004 house in Elk Grove would probably fit that description. Okay, so your rent's going to be $2,500. You got $500 in expenses. That's $24,000 a year divided by your purchase price of $400,000 is going to give you a 6% cap rate. Everybody understand that so far? Pretty simple, right? So income divided by purchase price. Gross rent multiplier is the 2,500 times 12 divided by the annual sales price divided by annual rent, right? Those are kind of the inverse of each other. Some people like using GRM better because it's a purer number without any expenses. I'm okay with using the cap rate. I use a gross cap rate because within the same asset class, I can kind of assume that I'm going to have the same expenses when I'm looking at 100 properties at once. I just like that one a little bit better. Okay, what would happen if I knew I had to do $50,000 worth of repairs to that house as soon as I bought it, though? I would probably stick it on the $400,000, and instead of dividing by 400, I'd divide by 450, because in effect, I really had to spend 450. The same thing would be true on the expense side. If I knew I had an HOA, I would go ahead and count that out, because not all properties would have an HOA. Okay, and so that's kind of how I deal with those two numbers to get through that. Okay, return on investment, amount made divided by amount invested. This is a simple concept. By the way, none of real estate is really complex. Most of it's all pretty simple. It's just how many layers of items did they stack up in order to get there, right? So you can break down just about any type of real estate. $100 stock that sells for $120 means you got a $20 profit. We're all okay with that, right? And $20 profit divided by the $100 it took for you to get that profit is your return on investment. Everybody good with that? All right, then we're going to jump into a little bit more. Here's another component you need to know is how long did you hold that property? So if you held that property for less than a year, you're getting short-term capital gains. If you held it for more than a year, you're getting long-term capital gains. Now, you're not a tax expert and you're not going to give tax advice. However, you should understand your client's position. Is your client up here where they only make $20,000 a year? They probably aren't buying an income property, right? Down here, they might very well be in this category, $77,000. they're probably owning an income property. And if you look over here, if they sell that income property less than a year, they'll pay 12% on their taxes, right? That could be just about anybody. That could be a grandma on Social Security, and she sells that duplex, she's going to pay 12% in taxes. You want to save her more than your commission? You want to earn your commission? Talk her into holding it for at least a year. Don't flip it. Hold it for a year, okay? Then she pays nothing, right? You want another situation there? You got somebody that's tight on income? Maybe they don't want to sell it outright. Maybe they want to take structured payments. Maybe they should take payments over 3 years because it saves them $12,000 in taxes. Okay? They don't have to pay that 12%. If they take those payments and it keeps them down into that price range, then that might help them out. Everybody understand that? So be aware of these numbers. When you get down into these numbers up here, you might say, well, I don't have any clients that make $400,000. My clients don't make $400,000 a year. They might have the year they sold the house because they made $200,000 in profit, right? Remember, we're not talking about owner-occupied houses. We're talking about investment houses. Owner-occupied, they already get an exclusion if they've been there for 2 out of the last 5 years. You don't have to worry about it. But over here, that's a 20% profit that they lost. They paid Uncle Sam 20% that they didn't have to pay him if their agent had told them to be a little bit more selective with what they do. Maybe they could have done a 1031 exchange. That would have been really helpful, right? Information to know if they were planning on reinvesting that money. Or maybe they just took a structured payment and kept their numbers down. Everybody good with that? By the way, when you're out there talking, thank Donald Trump. He brought those numbers way down. This side right here for short-term capital gains and this side over here was much higher before. So until that tax change came, is what happens when you put a real estate guy into the office. He took real good advantage of that. His retirement will be great. Quite different based on that. All right, so asset classes. Guys, your client already likes pistachio or chocolate. And if you've ever had a conversation with somebody that likes chocolate, trying to get them to like pistachio, you can't really do it. Okay, so you need to figure out what they like, and your first transaction is probably going to be what they already enjoy eating. Now, later on, I'm going to educate them on why they should move up the food chain and change into a different type of ice cream. But the first time I work with them, and as I'm earning their trust, I'm probably eating the ice cream that they like. Okay? Everybody understand that analogy? Okay. So, single family, duplex, fourplex, 5 to 16 units. This is just kind of some numbers across them. These are kind of average numbers of what you might pay. Notice the cap rates are different. So why would the cap rate be different for a fourplex? In this case, higher is better for the buyer. So why would for a person that owns it, why would it be different? 8% is quite a bit different than 4%. Why is that? Income, yeah, produces more income, right? So shouldn't everybody buy that one? The fourplexes? Maybe, right? Do you guys own any rentals? Anybody own any rentals? You own fourplexes or single families? Which one has more risk? Fourplex or single family? Single family has more risk? See how we're divided in the room? Right? Huh? Yeah, fourplex has more risk. You own a lot of real estate too. Yeah. So it's how you measure risk, right? So single family has risk of what? The biggest vacancy is your biggest risk. Every time somebody moves out, it will in reality probably, unless you're really good at it, take you 2 to 3 months to replace that tenant. That's a huge risk. You lost 16% of your income right there, right? But fourplexes have a different kind of risk. They have management risk. You got to deal with people that you normally don't deal with. Most of the time, they're in areas you normally don't go, right? So you have those kind of risks that are associated. You have more people risk associated with that. When you increase your risk, you increase your return, hopefully. Usually the reason you take on more risk is because you're getting a better return. That's 50% better return. That's a big deal. Okay? All right, so I'm going to show you some mitigating factors that help with that. So your management level is high. Over here it's the highest. If you get beyond 16 units, you actually need an on-site manager. Below 16 units, you don't have an on-site manager. Most of us probably won't deal with things higher than 16 units. In the residential capacity, on the commercial side, you definitely might. Okay? Your leveraging ability. Leverage down here, single family, most of the time you can pick up something really good for 20% down for your down payment. So that means your leverage 5 to 1, right? If you're only put 20% down and you bought a property that cost 5 times more than that, then you're leveraged 5 to 1. 75%, now you're leveraged 4 to 1. Okay? The reason that is common is because you'll have a lot of people that will do 25% down for commercial property or for income property. You get a better rate, okay? This DSCR, that's one of those acronyms we talked about earlier, debt service coverage ratio. The banks, when you get up into these bigger properties or commercial loan, anything above 4, they really don't care how much money you have to put down. It's not about 35% or 25%. What it's about is you have to have enough money to cover the operational expenses plus 25% on top of that. So they're building in a buffer no matter what the price is. Okay, so they don't care if it might take you 40% to get your operational costs down to cover the 1.25% debt coverage ratio. Okay, it might take you 50%. I don't know. Each individual deal has to do that, and your income plays into that as well. Okay, everybody good with that? Another thing I want to point out here is when you get up into this, over here, your appreciation, these properties appreciate the most, single family. Duplexes appreciate. When you start getting into fourplexes and above, it's pretty much all covered by the income that it produces. Revenue minus expenses equals income. So when you increase your bottom line income, your net operating income on these higher income properties, you've automatically increased the value. Right, so who is it? Brad and Jolene? Is that who it is? Angeline and Brad. When they move in next to your single family, you automatically increase your value, right? Because everybody wants to live next to them, right? So that's how it works with single family. With income, Brad and them could move in. That doesn't necessarily increase the value. What increases the value is when the rents start going up around them, right? When those rents start going up or the operational expenses start coming down, I've increased the value of my property. Does that make sense? See how it's different? Okay? All right. Let's slow down for just a bit before I jump into this. Everybody good with those first parts?
Yep.
I'm talking to a room full of smart real estate investors, so they get it, right? All right. So here we go. This is how we're doing as America. We're going to take a little scorecard. The average household savings is $175,000. The median household savings is $11,000. Why are those numbers so far apart? Everybody know the difference between average and median? Okay, so just if you don't, average is everybody. So if you got Bill Gates and myself and probably James, right? Then the average of all of our income looks pretty good. But if you have Bill Gates, myself, and James, and you take our median, then James's income is the median price, right? Because he's the middle of those three numbers, okay? So top 10% of households, the average is better, $1 million, but that median is 532. The upper middle range, this is the third quintile. So if I break all the households into 5 parts, the part that's here in the middle, the 60 to 80% part, they have a median savings of $48,000. Guys, if you're going to retire, is $48,000 enough to retire on?
No.
Does that show that we have a problem? I'm including retirement accounts,
Yes.
right? So we have a problem. What is the right number to retire on? We'll go ahead and use this one for sake of argument because it's real easy math to do. You take whatever you made the year that you retired or that you were comfortable with, that's what you want your income to be, and you multiply it times 25. Okay? So if I make $100,000, and I would just use this example all the time. I make $100,000 a year. I'm going to take 80% of that, which is $80,000 a year, and I multiply that times 25, and I get $2 million. For most people, without huge incomes now, if their income is around that 100 to 125 range, they could probably live on $2 million in retirement. All right, so let's walk that out. I've showed the rule of 72 to you guys before, I believe. Everybody remember it? All right. So this one's actually pretty simple. You could do it on the back of a napkin, which they did. And so rule of 72. How much time does it take to double your money at what interest rate? Okay? So in a nutshell, if I get a 6% interest rate, 72 divided by 6 equals 12 years. So I will double my money in 12 years.
Interesting.
All right? And so over here, I've taken a couple of these and ran them out. So if you want to double your money in 5 years, then you need a 15% return. Everybody got that? So now you understand. So what we first did is we found out where is our client now? How much money do they need to have saved up for retirement? Then we come back into the conversation and find out how much do they have versus how much they need, right? And so now we're going to see how long would it take them to get there, at what kind of interest rate do they have to do it. You see how that's educational for your client, right? And it also gives them hope, by the way, because we're going to start showing them how they can get that kind of return, because really, frankly, a lot of people think they can't catch up. And they take stupid risks when they don't have to take those risks when they are playing catch up. All right, so here's our above average investor. Let's say that he makes $100,000 a year and he has $100,000 to invest. Okay, so he's done a pretty good job. He's actually above average. They've done pretty well. They've got $100,000 to invest. They need to go 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4 cycles. Somewhere between cycle number 4 and cycle number 5, they'll hit that $2 million mark. Okay? So if we said that that was a 5-year cycle for them, then that means within 25 years they'll be at $3 million. Everybody with me? So probably between year 20 they'll be there. And by the way, what really happens is they get there faster than they think they could because they got more money and they start getting better and better returns. All right? So if they're 35 years old, this is a good conversation to have. If they're 40 years old, it's still pretty good. If they're 50, they're pretty dang nervous right about the time you have this conversation because they got to get a high return in order to meet that number. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to talk about those returns. This is a part of the presentation, but this is the one I felt was most important for you guys. So we talked about net operating income already. We're going to minus that debt service out of the net operating income, and we're going to have our cash flow. Everybody's pretty familiar with cash flow. You got a property, $400,000, you put 20% down, you got $2,000 PITI. So right now your rental revenue is going to be $2,500 a month. And I'm not going to go into expenses. I'm just doing this for the example. There would be other expenses here. But you got $500 times 12. That $500 is how much money you're making every month from cash flow. Everybody with me on that? So that's $6,000 a year. So my 20% down was $80,000. So I take the $6,000 I'm making in cash flow and I divide it into $80,000. And that gave me a return of 7.5%. Now remember from our previous conversation, our goal is 15%. So really, I'm only halfway there with the rental. That kind of sucks, right? I'm only halfway there. That's all the money I can make. What are we going to do to get our 15%? Because we need to retire someday, right? Well, there's another form of return on investment. This you get from debt paydown. So if you're familiar with this is an amortization table put on a chart, okay? And what it basically is, the red is the balance. You start paying your loan goes down. This is your interest in yellow. So in the beginning, most of your payment is interest, and it decreases the amount of interest and increases the amount of payment over time. Does that make sense? Everybody follow that concept? A lot easier to understand the concept if you put it visual, isn't it? By the way, that's true for your clients too. Even though you know this very well because you're familiar with it, it's still a hard concept to get across unless you show it. Okay? All right, so in the beginning, you've got $461 out of your 2011 payment going towards principal, and $1,066 going towards interest. All right. So your tenant is paying down your principal for you at a rate of $5,532 a year. That's pretty cool. What did we have to do in order to get that tenant to give us equity, basically, in our property of $5,532 a year? Well, we had to put $80,000 down for the down payment. So our investment was $80,000. Our return on investment was $5,532. So we have 6.91% return on investment. Everybody with me? The other slide we had 7.5% return on investment. Now we're up to 14% return on investment. We're getting closer to that 15 number, right? Here's the second one: expenses from deductions. So so we have these expenses that go out of our payment. Part of it's interest. We have property taxes. And we have insurance. Those are all built into the payment. There are additional expenses, most likely, but we're not going to talk about those right now. For the simplicity of the conversation, I'm just going after those. Now, I also went over and asked my client what kind of income he made. I didn't have to be a tax expert to look at a chart and see that his income is on this range and he's in a 24% tax bracket. Okay? I didn't break any tax laws. I'm not really giving tax advice. And every time I say this, I'll tell him to check with his tax advisor. Okay? But for the sake of the example, I can see that if he gets $18,600 worth of deductible items in his tax return, then he multiplies that by 24%, and that's the real number of what it's worth to him. Everybody understand that a dollar in deduction is not worth a dollar. A dollar in deduction is worth only the amount that you would have paid percentage-wise in income tax. Okay? So there's, by the way, you have to have income in order for this to be valuable to you. If you're insolvent, this isn't going to help you. Okay? Don't laugh. You're going to be surprised. Because you can be really insolvent on paper and not in real life. A lot of self-employed people spend a lot of their time, including us real estate agents, writing everything off and we have no income. Well, that might affect you if you don't have income to take your deductions against. Okay? So 4464, same kind of thing. You recognize now that's the return. This is the investment. Now you got another 5% return. Depreciation. This is a biggie. All right? And I can see James back there nodding his head because he remembers this because he owns those properties and he's depreciating all of them. Depreciation is the biggest difference where you'll see a paper loss even though you're really making money. Okay? The business world really goes around on depreciation. It drives a lot of decisions in real estate. Okay, this depreciation schedule for residential property. Remember, anything from between 1 and 4 units. Residential property is 27.5 years. In this case, being shorter is better than being longer. The commercial depreciation schedule is 39 years. Okay? So you got your house price was $400,000. We're talking about a single family. You take out the value of the land. Most of the time you can see that number right on the tax return if you've never used it before, but it's usually right there. The value of the land is less than the house of the price. Most of the time I usually find that it's 30% off. The land makes up about 30% of the improved value. Okay? So I take that number, the 280, bring it down over here, divide it by 27.5, means that that's worth a $10,181 depreciation deduction. Okay? So by the way, I get that every year. So that's pretty cool. Until I've used up the 27.5. So that's 10,181. There's my 24%, and now I've got the 2443 as my value. So there's my 2443, and again, it cost me $80,000 to get it. So I get another 3% return on investment. Everybody good with that? Everybody follow that? Okay. All right. So here's my ROI stack. See this big one? By the way, that's supposed to be $1 million. I'm pretty sure it is. So that's what it looks like. So if you ever want to carry it, remember to bring a big suitcase. Okay? Won't go in a backpack most of the time. Cash flow, 7.5%. Debt pay down gave me 6.91. Deductions gave me another 5.58. Depreciation gave me 3.05. So even without adding in appreciation, which is the biggest one, I'm already at 23% with zero price appreciation. Everybody good with that? Now you're starting to understand why it's good to invest in real estate long term. When you really get an understanding of it, you can pass that understanding to others. When you really believe it, they'll really believe it, right? So that's what it is, 23% without even going to appreciation. Appreciation blows this number out of the water. Appreciation winds up being so good it's hard to believe, okay? So with appreciation, $400,000 property, could you guys see a 4% appreciation rate? Could you see that property next year being worth $16,000? I could. Matter of fact, for the last 8 years, it's been 15%, not 4%, right? So the power of leverage, you only put down 20% on that property most likely, and you got to leverage it for, 25% if you got a better rate. Most investors a lot of times are now switching to 25%. So you're here, you got that gave you a 20% return. Okay, everybody good with that? We already had a 23 plus this 20. We just got a 40% return on our money. You hear anybody in the stock market giving you a 40% return on the money? Nope, not going to happen. All right, so how do we do this? I take a look at a lot of properties, right? Everybody knows you can pull all the MLS out to a spreadsheet. Okay, so you can pull the entire MLS out to a spreadsheet. So I'll pull out by asset class. I'll filter it I'll pull all the income properties out and filter it out by asset class. And then what I'm doing is I'm coming over here and I'm using a gross cap. I'm creating a screen that's measuring the rents and giving me a gross cap. I also look at how much per square foot everything's renting for. So it gives me a real good number when I'm working with a property. I know everything in town, what the rentals are going for. I do this on a regular basis. Okay? So that gives me a screening tool. We haven't got into it, but I'll show you some fix and flips in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about the screening tool I use for that too. I do the same thing on fix and flips. Fix and flips, it's a much more manual. I have a search set up for properties that are likely to be undervalued, right? Then I'll take those undervalued properties and I physically go through each one of them quickly and figure out which ones I think have some value and some room on them. I take those to a list and then I'll measure those lists against a radius circle around the property. So what I'm doing is I'm saying if I'm going to buy a fix and flip that I'm going to put money into, I need to have a 30% markup to ARV at least, right? ARV is after repaired value, right? So maybe you have two different kinds of flippers, pistachio and chocolate. I mean, two different kinds of investors, pistachio and chocolate. And then even within those ranks, you have different things that they like. But you need to find out really quick whether you're looking at a guy for a flip or looking at a guy for a buy and hold. They are not the same animal, okay? So when I get those diced out, what I'm looking for is a discount to market value of at least 30%. So if I do that radius, if I've got a property that's $200 a square foot in the radius, then I need to see that I can buy that for around $140 a square foot. If the radius around that property is not selling current sales at $200 a square foot, then I got to be able to buy it down at the 140 mark. Does that make sense? If I'm at 185, no reason for me to look at it, right? Because normally I can't do that kind of. And again, what I do for you guys is a little bit different because you're looking at lots of properties at once. I mean, this is out of 8,000 properties that are available on MLS. You need to get it down to 15, right? Okay? So total different do it. You're not taking somebody out because little Susie needs to go to this school, and so you're going around the school. These investors will take you all over the whole city. Does that make sense? So what you're looking for is the deals. So build your own screening tools. Anybody on this team is welcome to a copy of one of my screening tools. You can build your own. There's nothing I'm doing to get these properties that is anything different than what you can do. You can do all the work that I do. If you want me to do the work for you, I do it every month for myself anyway. If you want a copy of what I do, then it's $19 a month or $199 a year. Okay? If you want the flip one, it's $39 a month or $399 a year. And then you're working off the same data that I'm working off on my properties. And if you want them both together, there's a little team, $49 or $50. Tools that I use. Investopedia. Investopedia gives you anything you want to know. All that stuff I talked about, the stuff I threw out there real fast, cap rates, net operating income, any term you ever wanted to know about, Investopedia will give you a real good working definition of it, okay? Related to real estate. Some of the terms, you have to be careful because some of them are also used in the financial planning world, stocks and bonds world, and you'll need to make sure that you're going after getting a real estate definition. Sacramento Appraisal Blog, highly recommend this. Ryan Lundquist does a great job. And he's not an old man. You would think he'd be some guy in a tweed jacket somewhere. He's actually a young guy. I was really surprised when I met him. Property Radar, that's Sean O'Toole's out of Truckee. And he does an incredible job. Used to be Foreclosure Radar, and then we don't have foreclosures anymore. So what's a good business guy do? He changes the name of the company. Still a really good place to find NOD lists, to find properties that are going to foreclosure, to find anything like that you're looking for. I recommend a membership at his site. Podcasts, this is all free stuff. Bigger Pockets, they do have a membership, but you'll get so much value. If you like real estate, if you ever thought you wanted to invest in real estate, listen to that podcast. If you're not listening to it, you're missing it. If you want to sell more real estate coaching radio is a good one to do. Actually, that's Tim and Julie Harris, and they actually joined EXP a while back, so that's pretty cool. Imagine what EXP does for somebody that has a network. Amazing. Dave Ramsey, hey, that's good budgeting 101, but you got to take his buying stuff with a grain of salt. Where he lives, you can buy a house for $25,000. You know,
Where do you live?
Nashville, Tennessee. All right, so that's me. That's the presentation.